I get your attention? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Jeff Bradley. I'm the principal in charge of Metropolitan Planning Group. We're a consulting firm with offices in the North Bay, the South Bay, and the East Bay. We work exclusively for city government and county governments in the Bay Area. We've been engaged with Sausalito since 2010-11-ish on the housing elements, two cycles of the housing element. We've done some project review for the planning department, and we've been engaged on this general plan update since 2017. I welcome you all for coming. It's a fabulous turnout, exceeded our expectations. Due to that, we have some contingency plans. We ran out of blue cards. Everyone should have had a blue card. Apologize, we didn't have enough for everybody. If you did not get a blue card, but you'd like to participate in that part of the festivities, please put a little star or asterisk or note on the sign-in sheet that is on each table, and we will email you a digital version of the blue card. And you can fill it out digitally and email it back to us. With that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Mayor Joe Burns to officially welcome you to this workshop. And he will also introduce some of the other people that you'll hear from this morning, as well as Councilmember Joan Cox, who is also chair of the General Plan Advisory Committee. Mr. Burns.
Wow, this is awesome. On a Saturday morning, this many people to come and talk about our community. I'm watching this crowd grow, and I'm sitting in the back going, this is what Sausalito is all about. We have an extremely important issue to talk about today, and the community came out. So first thing I want to do is, and I know this sounds corny, but it really is it's such a great event to have. I want everybody to give a round of applause to yourselves for being here on a Saturday morning. Participating in this is going to go a long way in our community, and I really appreciate it, as does your entire council, which is here today. I want to introduce Jill Hoffman in the back, Vice Mayor Susan Cleveland Knowles, former Mayor and Council Member Ray Withey, who is also on the GPAC, and my honor to introduce hardworking former mayor last year and GPAC chair, Joan Cox. Joan will be facilitating today's meeting, so listen to what she says. But again, I just want to thank you all for being here. If this is the start of your engagement process with the GPAC, please continue. We have a lot more discussion to have as a community. It's so valuable for your input, your feedback, for you to come in and check what's happening as we come closer and closer to finalizing this general plan update in 2020. So thank you all for being here and have a great day. Joan.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everybody. I want to echo the Mayor's comments and thank you for being here. We worked really hard to get the word out, and evidently we were successful. So we're so pleased to see all of you here. So as Jeff mentioned, we started this general plan update process at the end of 2017. So we've been at this for almost 2 years already. We've been through our understanding phase, and we're now in our visioning phase. And visioning for the Marinship is one of our biggest priorities, and hence that's where you come in today. So we can't wait to share some information and some insights about the Marinship with you, and then to hear your feedback and your brainstorming and your creativity and see where we go from here. So the General Plan Advisory Committee is comprised of 13 community members, 9 of whom are here today. And can I ask the GPAC members to please stand? These folks have been meeting twice a month for 2 hours each meeting for 2 years already. And we're going to continue doing this through the end of next year. So we owe all of them a debt of gratitude for their service, for their volunteering, and for the amazingly different and diverse and interesting perspectives that they bring to this project. So again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff.
Thank you, Joan. We have a series of short presentations to bring everyone up to speed on some really fundamental issues affecting the Marinship. And I'm going to ask you to hold your questions and comments until we get through the presentations and we go to the table exercise. Throughout the day, there will be resources available to you, including GPAC members, consultant staff that have the blue lanyard type name tag. The GPAC members have a purple star on their name tag, so we don't lose track of them. Okay. And we also have some city staff representatives. Bill Meeker, please raise your hand. Bill Meeker is filling in for Lily Xinxing, who's on maternity leave. And we also have Steve Flint, acting Community Development Director, focused on development review and current planning, I believe. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And we also have one or two other planning department staff here. So with that, I'm going to do a very quick overview of the general plan process that this workshop is a part of. Everyone knows what a general plan is? Raise your hand.
Yes.
That's pretty good. So what is the general plan? The general plan is really the highest level policy document the city has to guide future land use, future development, anything that affects the physical nature of the city. We show it here at the top of the pyramid, but you can also think of it as the foundation of the pyramid. Everything else has to be consistent with the general plan. A lot of people think the zoning ordinance is the most important thing because it seems more technical and more legal and more binding. But the zoning ordinance simply implements the vision, the goals, the policies within your general plan. So the general plan really is the constitution of the city. And it really has, go back. Sorry. And it has really three major components that as we go through this morning, you might keep in mind. There's goals or objectives. Goals are real high-level things. Like we want to have a safe city. We want to have a friendly city. We want to have a city with a good circulation system. That's a high-level goal. And then you have policies that will implement that goal. Policy is something like every time someone builds a new street, we'll make sure that it's safe and adequate and the police and fire trucks have room to get down there in all circumstances. And then an implementation measure or an implementation action is a more detailed statement of how the city will get to that desired end state that's represented by those goals. So sometimes you'll hear these terms used interchangeably, but they're really three separate things, and it's helpful to keep that in mind as we go through these visioning exercises. So from the city's own strategic plan, which is updated every year or two, which is a very important document, that has a vision statement associated with it. And it's short and sweet, and it mentions the general plan, so I think that's pretty cool. A safe, thriving, friendly community with an updated general plan. That is the city's stated vision statement. And so we're all here this morning working on that last part of it, and hopefully the other three items as well. So as Joan mentioned, there's 4 phases. Phase 1, project understanding. We did a big existing conditions report. I've only brought 1 copy to share, but you can also read it online. That was our documenting all of the existing conditions in the community. The next phase is visioning, having those high-level thoughts about where do you want the city to go over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The existing general plan is almost 25 years old, so you get a sense of how long these documents are available to the community to guide that future growth and change. Phase 3 is plan development, where we really get into the nitty-gritty of how the document comes together to implement those policies that support those goals. And phase 4 is plan adoption. That's where things always get really interesting. And maybe the people that weren't here today start coming to the meetings. We get different viewpoints. But at the end of the day, it goes to the planning commission, goes to the council, something comes out at the end. An approved general plan. by late next year. September, October, right in there. So we've done a lot of community outreach. We're going to continue to do a lot of community outreach. The GPAC meetings, as Joan mentioned, have been fairly consistent and regular, and every meeting is available and open to the public. The videos are online. The minutes are published. We've had 5 community workshops. Actually includes some of the community workshops we're going to have in the future. This is our second major community workshop on this process. We've had several stakeholder meetings. We've done what's called pop-up workshops. We have a smaller version of this with some type of information like that, and we pop up at like the farmer's market and kind of get people a little more sporadically. And then some community chats, and a lot of online information has been gathered as well. So the General Plan Advisory Committee, who stood up a moment ago, they've been busy, and they have been very carefully keeping an eye on us, your consultants, which is always a good idea, and keep an eye on your consultants. And they have done a general plan audit to really look at your existing general plan under a microscope and say what's working, what's not working, what should we keep, what should we get rid of, what should we change. So we're really starting with that. This isn't a total blank sheet exercise. This is, hey, we've had this general plan for almost 25 years. It's done a fairly good job. It's helped the city get to the point where it is today, which is not a terrible place. It's a pretty good place. Looking out the window here, it's a pretty nice view. They've had in-depth discussion of the general plan goals and policies. They have reviewed and approved that existing conditions report. And they've also looked at the structure of the general plan. Is this the type of structure we want? Are these elements or chapters covering the things that are important to us here in Sausalito, in this place? There are certain things we have to do under state law. There's other things we can do as optional things to respond to the needs and desires of the community that we are in. So that's the website I mentioned, SausalitoGeneralPlan.org. It has a calendar, it has documents, it has notices, it has a way to put in comments. So anytime you think about, you're out in the community and you see something or you think of something or someone tells you something that triggers a general plan thought, you'll go right home and just log it in right there. And we'll capture that. This is where we are. The blue line is the city limits. The pink line is the 101 cutting through. And the Marinship is the red line. So it's obviously a significant area of the city based on its land uses, based on the history, based on the know-how out there. I mean, where else could you build a ship the size of the Matthew Turner in the Bay Area? Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, this is a fabulous spot. We can see it. We can see it from here, but this workshop is actually occurring outside of Marinship, which is important to recognize. So you might hear about some documents. You think to yourself, why are they talking about this stuff from 1989, 85? I graduated high school in 1987, so that's pretty old document. Oh, 87. All right. So these are historical documents, but they're also alive today. These are active, important documents that have a controlling mechanism on aspects of the Marinship. So I'm going to start at the bottom. The Fair Traffic Initiative was an initiative put forward by the voters. And usually the voters only self-generate and self-initiate and do that when they're really upset about something. And so obviously that happened here. I'm not going to go into the gory details, but the Fair Traffic Initiative exists. It's old, but it's on the books. And it has that whole area from a planning perspective on lockdown. General plan change, voter initiative. Zoning change, go back to the voters. Changes in how big a building you can build, go back to the voters. It sounds unusual, but some cities, the entire city's like that. There's cities in the South Bay where voters initiatives have been put in place on the entire city. So it's distinctive and it's a little different, but it's not totally unheard of. Moving up a level, the Marinship specific plan was adopted directly in response to the initiative. This initiative is a broad statement of intent, and the Marinship implemented that. The specific plan implemented the Fair Traffic Initiative. It did some other things, but that was the main thing it did. The business inventory from 2011 is historical information about the businesses that existed at that time. The WHAM report stands for Waterfront and Marinship report, very exhaustive analysis, again focused on business, fiscal issues, economy, dollars and cents. And I'd just like to encourage anyone today, at any time, if you hear an acronym and you don't know what it means, just ask the person who uses it, what does that mean? Because planners are notorious for just getting into crazy acronym stuff. So just call us on it. Say, what is that? So WHAM is Waterfront and Marinship. That's what that one is. I had to look it up this morning, so I couldn't remember. And then the strategic plan is that document the city did that we mentioned at the beginning that had the nice, short, sweet vision statement. That was the strategic plan where the city council and the departments have their clear statement of where they're going. It gets a little more into city budget issues than the general plan typically does. So it's kind of seen as like a parallel document that is implementing sort of the boots on the ground, the things the city is really doing in real time to address the needs of the community. So this is my last slide, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker, who will be Asher. He'll talk about sea level rise. We'll also, throughout the day, have different topics. Throughout this morning presentation, we'll focus on historic context, implementation, and the distinctive character of the Marinship. So that's kind of a little outline of what you'll see before we break back into the tabletop exercise. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Asher. I'm a member of M Group here, and thanks so much for taking some time this morning to come learn with us and then work with us after you've done these presentations. So as Jeff said, I'm going to talk about sea level rise as well as subsidence. And when you came in, hopefully you saw the map of the Marinship on the left, which shows a government organization called Baywave, what they approximate sea level rise is going to look like in 2050. And it's basically it's kind of, you realize that this is going to be a thing. We're talking about general plan that's going to affect the next generation. The next generation is going to have to figure out what the Marinship is going to look like with sea level rise. So you see how that is how it looks, and you also can tell how important it is by looking out on the other walls and realize that, oh my goodness, we're surrounded by the bay, and through its history, Sausalito, the Marinships lived with the bay, lived because of the bay, arguably, and that relationship's going to have to continue. And a lot of what we're trying to do here, hopefully, is figure out how this relationship will stay strong as it changes over the next generation. So that's that map. I always want to have it here as well. And where this comes from is Baywave, which is a Marin County organization. And they do things called vulnerability assessments, where they basically look at a whole lot of ecological, other scientific data to figure out how sea level rise is going to affect the county. And they have, you can go to their website, and they have lots and lots of documentation, lots of details about the county, about Sausalito specifically, about the Marinship specifically. I just want to make sure that everyone understands this is something that's done by the county. It's done very much at like the county level. So when they project things out, they're not really focused on how it might affect individuals or kind of location, but it gives us a really good overview that they've been using so far, and it really gives us a sense of what the Marinship is going to look like going forward. But of course, as a lot of folks out here know, we don't always only have to deal with sea level rise out here. We also have to deal with subsidence. Subsidence is when the ground level sinks a little bit. And because of the Marinship's history, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, it was basically built on fill. The U.S. Navy basically just needed a whole new port here, so they put it up and they just kind of dumped sand and dumped fill into marshlands. And because it was done relatively recently, it's still kind of moving around a little bit. And this, obviously, we think of sea level going up and ground level going down, it kind of exacerbates some issues. But it also affects infrastructure, pipes, anything going underground. Those things can get dislodged and just kind of get a little bit strange, to use a scientific term, going forward. So that's something that really affects the Marinship when we're talking about infrastructural changes, whether it's roads or new sewers, things like that. It's important to keep in mind that the ground is shifting over the course of the time that we'll be talking about today. So you saw that map, and just to put some numbers on it, there's a, we're assuming or approximating 25 acres that will be inundated in the Marinship. And there should also be on everyone's table, there's a couple citywide sea level rise maps, which you can look at. And basically, how sea level rise affects Sausalito is mostly going to be in the Marinship. There's a few other areas, and of course, a lot of the piers and docks, they'll have to make changes as well. But a lot of the focus, when we're talking about vision for the future of Sausalito, focus for sea level rise should, in many ways, be the Marinship. And as I was talking with subsidence, there's a lot of roadway right-of-way that's affected as well. And you know, if you think about how people get to shore now from either the water or the land side of the Marinship, that's going to change. And something I'm going to talk about a little bit on the end of this presentation is there's a lot of opportunities in how these changes will affect the Marinship. And I want people to not only be, I mean, this is, yeah, frankly, for me, it could be kind of terrifying to look at how much sea level rise will affect, you know, this community, many communities over the next generation. But also, okay, if these relationships are changing, how can what is here now seize that opportunity to kind of maybe make some of these changes work well for what is here now or what we're expecting to come. So when I say things like that, we did an analysis we presented to GPAC earlier this summer, and basically said that in the Marinship, there's 3,000 jobs in these kind of these blue areas that would be at risk of sea level rise. These, by that I mean that the businesses that exist in the areas that might be inundated hold 3,000 workers today, approximately 3,000, and that's a pretty large chunk of Sausalito's employee base. I believe the census said there's a little bit more than 6,000 employees based on their last estimates. Seeing about it, it's a little bit less than half of the jobs in Sausalito are in these buildings that may be flooded or yeah, may experience some change over the next generation. But also when I say that, I don't want to put everything only into like quantitative figures. There's also a lot of history and a lot of, not even like there's history in terms of historic landmarks, but also history in terms of just businesses that have been here for a long time, individual family stories that exist that, yeah, are at risk or at this sort of inflection point of how do we want to maintain these stories as we talk about what we need to change as our relationship to the water changes. And not only that, but I'm going to talk about roadways, but also these bicycle pedestrian paths. The way people get around, the way people experience the Marinship is something that, yeah, is liable to change. And again, I want to emphasize this can be very anxiety-inducing. Change can be very anxiety-inducing, and sea level rise especially here. But it also is a way, okay, we have a really neat opportunity here when we're at this visioning workshop, where we can wonder how we can envision what we want to see in terms of our relationship to the past, our relationship to what exists. We can say what we really want to focus on, what we really want to maintain, and how that relationship will be affected over the coming years. And because I don't want to be so gloom and doom about this, hopefully I'm able to express this as this goes on, I want to talk briefly about just some mitigation strategies. Again, this is something that we presented that you can find in previous GPAC meetings, but there are ways to, again, affect this relationship as it goes forward. Kind of the traditional thing that folks think about is a seawall, but by that, hopefully you can see the image. I don't just mean like plunking a wooden fence down into the water, but you can do things with coral reefs, kind of man-made reefs, and ways to kind of just affect where water flows. There's taxing districts, which is kind of the city or the county can collect revenue to then, implement some other mitigation strategy. And this is something they can decide how they want to do that. That's one other way. Weatherization initiatives, and this is something where people, property owners along the water in places that are worried about how this might affect them, might take on their own individual mitigation strategies, what works best for them, or they might come together with a few neighboring folks and do it that way. Wetlands restoration, which hopefully is somewhat straightforward. It's a way to kind of bring in more marshlands in order to basically serve as a sponge and a place that water can go to, so it doesn't affect places where we still want hard concrete buildings, things like that. As well as floating foundations, which is when a building is built on or is retrofitted with a foundation that can basically rise and fall with the level of the water, and the infrastructure, the sewers pipes go in that way. So there's ways around this, and it's not a gloom and doom scenario, but it is something that, as we talk about the past and we start thinking about the future, we want to think about what that future is going to look like and what that future relationship with Richardson Bay out here is going to look like. So hope that was informative, and again, I'll be roving around, so if you have any questions for me about this, I'm happy to answer them as the day goes on. But next we're going to talk about the historic context of the Marinship, and that's going to be Tom.
Thank you. While Asher is changing the slideshow, I wanted to say, when I was driving over here this morning, I was listening. How come that only happens to me? Well, I was listening to a podcast, and the interview is about 2 days old, and the interviewer was talking to a former FEMA director about the events that have happened on the East Coast and the whole East Seaboard this last week. And he asked the guy, are we getting better at planning for these events that are getting bigger and unknown capacities? And the former FEMA director said, no, we're still planning for our current capabilities. And I thought about this. And so this is why we set up these 4 little presentations today, is we're hoping these are going to be, you obviously know the historic context of the Marinship more than me, but I'm just going to give you a few little things to jog juices, your creative juices. But I'm hoping that when we get to the small group exercise, and each table has a map that was shown on the previous slide, that you can start to take those characteristics and capabilities that exist in the community today and think about those problems that Asher just kind of gave a high-level overview of, and start to envision how can we grapple with this? How can we, if we like who we are, how do we continue being who we are, but grappling with these issues that we face, and what is it that makes us uniquely capable of doing that? So, again, this is just going to be a very brief presentation about just reminding everybody about the historic context and how this place came to be. As Asher mentioned, it used to be a lot of wetlands, Native American communities that were conveniently removed in approximately 1838. All of the material that we're showing you today is not sort of our ideas. This has all been vetted in the background report, a copy of which we have here on the resource table, along with a copy of the Marinship specific plan. So if you, in your table conversation, need to see anything, it's right over here. So this is, again, it used to be called Sausalito with a different spelling. Through the years it changed. The railroad was much more prevalent actively, like many communities in California, than it is today. And as you can see at that little sense at the bottom, it used to be just a little marshland, a little community with 30 houses and these rail facilities, its rail network. When World War II happened, this became an incredible factory and source of jobs for a lot of activity that supported the war effort. Namely, a lot of the Liberty ships were built here. There's a few places around the country, Richmond here, where taking advantage of the portside facilities, these were able to become pretty good turnouts for the war effort. And as you can see, approximately 2 of those Liberty ships, one Liberty ship was out every 2 months, just right here. There's also, we thought this was really important, sort of a civil rights context, and including a future famous litigator happened right here. The issue was here. It was a civil rights issue, but it was also an issue tangled up with union rights and the right to work if you weren't Caucasian. So this happened, I think, in approximately 1942, if I'm right. Also, this building still stands. This building was originally part of the war effort. It was part of that supply chain for making those Liberty ships. There were molds and things that were made. I think it's called the mold loft. And so there were pieces of the Liberty ships that were modeled here, and it was part of that effort. And I'm pretty sure you can't build a building this tall in the Marinship today. I think it exceeds the current height limit. But it's a pretty remarkable building. And there's this nonprofit that exists there. I think many of the members are here. A lot of artists are in this 3-story building. Jeff talked earlier about the Marinship specific plan, sort of in this context of a historic context presentation and bringing us into the contemporary era. Also around 1980, very significant regional tourist attraction. The Bay Model opened, which attracts people from all over to come to it. As Jeff mentioned, the Fair Traffic Initiative controls the FAR specifically. Floor area ratio of buildings are tied to that, and it is a voter initiative. And then the Marinship specific plan. The general plan that we're working on right now has the opportunity to write those high-level goals that Jeff talked about and some policies for what might happen after the Marinship specific plan. What's the future? What future does the general plan direct for the Marinship? Now, since we're in the contemporary era, we're going to go to today. These photos are all approximately less than 2 months old. So there's a lot going on. There's the houseboat factory where they're still making houseboats today, and they turn them out. And then there's the rails where they're able to haul boats out of the water. I took a little tour of that a couple of weeks ago. Kind of an incredible place, and I'm told it's the only facility between here and Anchorage that can pull out boats of that size, of the size that it pulls out for repair. It's another picture of the Matthew Turner down there, which I also took a tour of, and it's soon to open for business. You're getting tours, overnight and day tours. So that's the historic context, and again, this is just one piece of what we wanted to give you an overview of before you start talking in your groups, and you'll have this map to draw on and discuss later. So now I'm going to go to the next presentation by Jason's here from EPS. He's also a member of the consultant team, and I'm going to let Asher change the slideshow. So I'll be back to talk about another issue after Jason.
What's your, you're Tom
I'm Tom Ford.
Ford? Ah, thank you.
Tom Ford.
Hello, I'm Jason Moody with the firm Economic and Planning Systems. We're part of the consulting team, as was mentioned, and we're on board to look at economic issues, which, in my view, is a very important part of the puzzle about what can or cannot happen or what should and shouldn't happen. It's definitely something we need to consider. It's certainly not the only thing, but it's an important consideration, particularly when you're looking potentially at making investments in infrastructure, some of the investments that might be required to deal with issues that have been addressed. That costs a lot of money. And so clearly the economic viability of this site and what you might be able to do with it is an important part of this process. Let me see if I can figure this out.
To the right.
I got you. Thank you.
Yep.
So this is my firm. We're in the Bay Area. We're in Oakland, but we work throughout the whole Bay Area, and we do all the things on this chart. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we were assigned to do in this particular effort with regard to the Marinship, some of the caveats, the approach and caveats to what we've done, and then our findings, and then we'll open up for discussion. Actually, I understand we're doing the Q&A at the very end of the whole process.
Yeah.
Again, this is a target area of the general plan, so we're helping to trying to think about what levers the general plan might be able to, we might want to include in the general plan to make investment in the Marinship more viable, or not, depending on the policy or the input we receive. So the key questions that we've looked at is what land uses are most viable from an economic perspective, and how do various regulatory levers affect a landowner or developer's financial incentives to invest here. And the ones that we kind of looked at here would be the FAR, which is floor area ratio, which is another way of describing the density that you would be able to build at. Another one is the allowable uses, where you can actually build, whether it's retail, office, housing, R&D, or industrial, or whatever it is. That's something we looked at. And then the parking requirements is another big consideration. We actually didn't, we held that constant throughout, but it is something that turns out is a big factor because parking takes up land, and that means there's less land that you can do other things with. Throughout our analysis, we assumed no change in the parking requirements, but that is something that that's kind of out there that we need to think about. So what did we do? Well, first of all, we started this process by engaging with the property owners and tenants that were there, talking to them. Then we identified a couple of building types that we might want to think about to look at from a financial feasibility perspective. We looked at light industrial, office R&D, retail service, and live workspace. And then we kind of defined a couple of scenarios. One is the existing as built, kind of the status quo. We looked at potentially building out to the allowable FAR that would be consistent with the Fair Traffic Initiative that was mentioned earlier. We looked at changing the allowable uses, and then we looked at, but no change in FAR, just changing what the allowable uses would be. And then we looked at a potential increase in FAR. And again, I want to emphasize, we're not advocating any of these things. We're looking at them because it's important to understand from an economic perspective what could happen there, or what might happen there. And again, I want to talk about the financial feasibility perspective that we're looking at here. It's really from the perspective of a landowner or a developer who's looking at a piece of property and deciding how to invest in that property. And so that's the analysis. We're not looking at the perspective, for example, of a tenant. That's a different perspective. And they may have they have their own business plan and financial goals and objectives that differ from the landlord or the property owner often. Not always, they don't always differ, but sometimes they do. We've used this term called residual land value, which is just an economic term that says if you take an investment and you You subtract all the costs of that investment, you subtract the value that you get after you do it, there's something left over, what we call residual land value. That number is an important number because it tells you if that number is positive, then it's potentially a viable investment. If it's negative, a property owner or investor or developer probably wouldn't pursue that project. So that's the metric we use. The key factors that affect the viability of a project, obviously the cost of doing the project, the vertical development cost. We call both hard and soft costs. Soft cost includes a required developer return. Developer's not going to do something unless they get a return or investment or whatever the investment is. Market rents and vacancy rates are also another part. That's the value side of the question. It also, something we didn't include in this analysis, just to simplify it, is clearly if you're doing something that you have to take into account what the existing revenue stream would be, and that's going to vary by property. Some of them, have different values than others. So that's another factor that to do that, we'd have to look at a parcel by parcel basis, which we didn't do. And then another big thing that we need to think about, which is the context underlying all of this, is the infrastructure upgrades that would need to be implemented to deal with issues like sea level rise and subsidence and other factors. At some point, if there's a desire to go forward and do a bunch of changes in this area, you're going to need to understand the cost of those upgrades. For this first phase, we don't know that number yet. So that's a really big question mark. But I think we need to understand whether or not certain types of development would be viable in any case, regardless of that cost, before we spend a lot of time, which would be a kind of expensive study, figuring out what exactly you would need to do to make sure that this area is viable for development or even existing uses for the next 50 to 100 years, and that's a big number and something that we might need to look at. I'm not going to go too much over the caveats. This is really telling you kind of what this study is not. But basically, we took a hypothetical or generic building prototype. We didn't actually pick anybody's property or any particular parcel. We just said, in a hypothetical, would you be able to build a light industrial building, an office building? Would you be able to put major tenant improvements in the existing building? Those types of things. We didn't pick any particular building. And that's what we used for this analysis. And we applied this hypothetical prototype to make some conclusions. We recognize, of course, that every situation is different and every property is different. So it's a very generic analysis. So there will definitely be exceptions to some of the things that we say. The other thing I would say, again, is that a landowner who operates his or her own business may have a slightly different set of incentives than the one we've looked at here. So if you both own and operate the building, you may be willing to forego some of the standard investment return thresholds that are normally required to get a loan for a real estate investment, because it's your building, you have deep pockets, you want to be there. There's all sorts of factors. It's your business. The cost of moving is very high. So these are all kind of uncertain considerations that might affect any particular site that is hard to incorporate into a systematic analysis like this. So it is important to understand that we looked at it from the perspective of a developer who's looking at his property as a real estate asset, and he's trying to figure out what makes sense financially. That's one particular lens, and that's what we focus on. So the conclusions that we make here are looking at that lens only. So some of the findings. The existing factors currently affecting property owners, there's a number of factors that affect the development feasibility. These include the fact that the private ownership of the circulation network limits the use of the land. So a lot of the ways to get in and out and circulate around the property, those areas are privately owned roads, privately owned, and so it's hard to develop on those because you need those roads to get in and out and circulate around. So it reduces how much you can actually develop on the site. Obviously, parking requirements that we didn't explore changing those. You could potentially change those. We didn't look at that. And the other thing is we assumed you would never build an underground parking lot here. It'd be almost impossible to build underground. So that's not even on the table. So the parking requirements do limit what you can accomplish. The other thing is that the existing office and R&D and retail development in many locations already exceeds the allowable FAR in both the industrial zone and the waterfront zone. So the existing, one of the couple levers we looked at, we are assuming the existing FAR, so you really can't do anything anyway in some of these parcels because you're already above what you're allowed to do. So you might as well just maybe concentrate on focusing on your existing building and improving that for a number of those locations, unless you decide to relax that FAR restriction, which I understand would require voter approval. So with that in mind, and some hybrid of office R&D or a live work prototype may, I'm going to say may, command rents that would support development at densities at existing as-built FAR scenarios. So you theoretically could do some investment of those land use types, assuming you get the right market rents, or your market rents are in a kind of optimal level where you would hope to achieve. However, there really isn't given the rents for light industrial or retail service building as a standalone building, the rents that you would likely achieve there would not support the development of a building of that type. Relaxing land use restrictions, in other words, the types of tenants you can have in certain buildings, is probably the most significant regulatory determinant in achievable project value there. In other words, if you were going to ask an owner of a building to make major investments in the building itself, not expand the building, but make major investments in the improvement of that building, he would probably do that if he knew he had a little bit more flexibility in the types of tenants that he could have in that building. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what tenants should or shouldn't be allowed, or what is currently going on or not, because as I understand it, there's a lot already going on there, and I'm not going to get into whether or not everything that's happening there is actually allowed or not, because there's a lot of gray area. But just if the land use restrictions were relaxed, there's likely that the property owners would have more of an incentive to put major amount of money into their buildings to attract higher paying tenants, just from an economic perspective. However, even the prototypes and scenarios that appear positive, there's a question about whether or not that level of, so give me an example. If you are getting $100 a year in rent and right now, and someone says if you do these tenant improvements, you'll get $150 a year in rent. So as an investor, you say, well, the 150, that's a good number, but I'm already getting 100. So my huge investment's only giving me an increment of 50. So there's a question there that unless your building is vacant, not generating any revenue, even if the project that you're looking at is positive, it may not be better than the existing income stream that you have. So that's a hurdle rate that's going to be, again, a project by project, property by property determination about whether it would make sense, even if you had the flexibility of changing the land use types, whether it would make sense for you to make that investment. It would depend on the unique circumstances about your existing tenant, the income stream that you have, and what you're allowed to do. So there's a lot of variables that are hard to understand, and, but as a general, we looked at this in very general terms. So hopefully that's not all bad news. It basically is probably reaffirming what you already understand to be the case, that doing a lot of real estate investment in the Marinship right now, there's a lot of challenges, and there's a that would make it less viable. One of them is just the return you're going to get, as well as the regulatory context. I would say that there's a potential if in an ideal world, not an ideal world, in a particular world in which, say, somebody, just hypothetically, one owner owned the whole area, and they were going to say, I'm going to just do a bunch of stuff here and I'm get a return. There's probably things that they would do. They would optimize the circulation. They would probably be able to implement certain area-wide financing mechanisms, etc., to actually create some change. That would require a lot of coordination with a bunch of stuff. One of the issues we have here is that we have a lot of property owners, 96 parcels, and I don't know how many individual property owners, but a lot of them. 59 property owners. So when you're trying to do an area-wide plan, when you have 59 property owners and you want to get those property owners to participate in some project-wide financing mechanism that would help support the infrastructure needed to do this, that's a pretty heavy lift. You probably would need to get all those property owners to vote to approve some sort of financing mechanism. And in California, that requires 2/3 of the property owners there to approve some sort of financing mechanism in most cases. So it would be a lot of coordination, and it would be a very strategic public-private partnership. I've seen it done. It would be a challenging thing to do. So this is just a kind of a breakdown of how the property lays out. You have you have a big chunk. Well, there's two graphs. I think this is probably the most relevant one. This excludes parcels that have no land area, because some of the parcels are actually already in water, so you're really not going to do much with that. But when you look at that, you have private, 85% of the land, public, 15% of the land, and then the private is 85 different parcels and some over 50 property owners.
Could you read that, because we can't see it?
Okay, so this says, this is a pie chart. This is the land, private, 148 acres, 85%. Public, 26 acres, 15%. There are 96 parcels in the Marinship. 11 of them are publicly owned. That course, this is the number of parcels, this is the size of the holdings. 85 are privately owned. So that's basically, I guess there's some of the parcels are owned by the same property owner. That's why there are more parcels than there are property owners. So I think there's around 50 or 55 individual property owners. That's just summarizing those conditions. This is just a summary of our findings. Again, you have an existing building here. It's either one of these. Negative means that you would not pursue the development, like light industrial as built. You wouldn't pursue it. You wouldn't redo that building today. Although it's already there, so in that case, it made sense years ago, but it probably wouldn't make sense today. And these are the scenarios. You have the existing, you have built out to the allowable FAR, and then a use change, and then increased FAR. These are all, the black is all positive. You could theoretically get a positive return on these types of things, but not the red. That is my presentation. I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but we're holding off to the end.
Yeah, Jason will be here for the entire workshop too, so he'll be rotating around. If you see him come by your table and you have a specific question, please ask him. So I have one more thing I want to just share with you, and we're just a little bit behind. Just, again, you know this better than I do, but just putting it in everybody's head as you head off to turn your chairs around and start working. That only happens as you start to work on your workshop table. So I just want to talk a little bit about character. So we're really today, what's out there. So it's kind of a very full service community. There's a lot of different things going on. There's jobs, there's a post office, there's a park, there's a grocery store. There's very unique craftspeople that do things, like I said earlier, one of those sites is the only place between here and Anchorage that does what it does in terms of the kinds of ships that it works on. And then again, the Bay model is really a regional resource for tourism, and I think and educational purposes. It's a great amenity. So there's a pretty active maritime industry that services the entire Bay Area and even beyond, up and down the West Coast, the marinas and the businesses that take place there, that offer services there. Over 2,000 ships or berths Then there's these, we actually saw this ship in action. We were taking a boat tour, and it was just going back and forth to Angel Island, bringing off trash, taking things out there, and just doing round trips. And we were only out on the water for a couple of hours, and we saw it twice. That's from the core. And then there's a lot of the industrial arts are very well represented in the Marinship. There's a lot of different businesses that continue traditions that started generations ago through artists and other people that migrated to the Marinship as a place to be. There's the Barda collection and the houseboats painting here. But this artistic heritage, is very strong out there. I already showed you the building that's 3 stories with studios, but there's artists in many other parts of the community. The Arts Festival just last week attracted people, and I noticed it had a pretty nice parking rate based on driving in on Bridgeway that day, but you got to make money. I've been on the Matthew Turner. That was pretty awesome. And it's, like I said, it's about to open. It'll be taking students and other just regular tourists, but I think the educational component that facility, that amenity offers, and it was built just right up the hill and put into the water from there. The things that it offers is pretty incredible. And the school, the Arquette School, and what it offers the community. So I've toured some of these businesses, and they are pretty incredible. And actually at our last GPAC meeting, one of the entrepreneurs for one of these businesses, he actually has a plexiglass case, and it's filled with liquid, and you can drop your laptop in it and nothing happens because the chemical properties in the liquid don't affect the circuit. So it's pretty incredible things that are going on out there and being sold. So there's a lot of the businesses that are doing business out there are a significant component of the Sausalito economy. Again, these I'm sure are all things that many of you know. So I'm going to transition to the next presentation, and what this is going to talk about is, now that we've sort of all wet our whistle on some of the issues that make the Marinship what we make it, I'm going to go through some of the things that exist on everybody's table. So you all have a map, and you also have a set of colored pens. It's going to get very noisy in here, but what we want you to do for about an hour is to have a conversation with your table mates about what you think can happen. Some of the other resources, can I borrow this? Some of the other resources on the table are just sort of at a general plan level. What are some of the existing uses that are out there? You have an 11 by 17 zoning map. What are the existing zoning? Please do not be confined by what's existing. Really think about the future and think about the opportunities ahead and the things that are going to happen. What we'd like you to do, not every table, but most of them have a GPAC member. We're calling those people table resources. As we noted earlier, they've been meeting about this for almost 2 years, talking about this process. So feel free to ask them questions.
Bistros and coffee shops, that kind of thing.
It's sort of like a cooperative model, sort of like what we have at Galilee, where it's like a resident. Oh no, resident owned.
It's only residents though. What if somebody's a stranger and wants to partake and
it also seems to me like
sit on the lawn? You know, it's like I noticed that you guys have a very extremely closed community. Even to like, I'm an artist. Like I'm an artist, hardcore 1000%. But I experience an extreme closed down aspect of it's all inclusive. It's a secret membership, and nobody outside is allowed.
We find that we're constantly doing lately marketing just to let people know we exist, and we always find it amazing where they go, oh my God, this is so big, and we don't even know anything about it. Yeah.
This, I would say, this is sea level rise plus 100-year flood top. Flood is what that is, basically. A flood event is what this map is. But This is also about what the median about what they're predicting in about 75 years.
What do you want to do when you develop your property?
Well, we're Clipper. We're fine where we are, but we can't. You know, our buildings are nice. We're 100% W zone. We have the largest boat yard, one of the largest ones in San Francisco Bay. And I have places on our property that are diked off because we can't afford to build anything, just like that second to last presenter said.
Now, you've got to find the big money somewhere to try and do that. But in the meantime, as it's slowly creeping up, what are the areas you're going to keep? And what are the areas you're going to just let the sea come in because you just can't save it? But if you want to save jobs, you've got to figure out how to save the working waterfront.
Is that your main goal, to save jobs?
No, I think it's really important, though, for the community.
Kathy, table 1.
Hi everybody, can you hear me okay? Okay, so table number 1 is a really smart table, so you guys have a lot to stand up to, okay? So we came up with 3 things that we all pretty much agreed on. Number 1 is to maintain the character of the maritime area within the Marinship area, but that should include mixed use, being maritime use, arts, potentially some living, but not in the exact maritime spot. But that should also include access through the whole Marinship area, because right now it's kind of difficult to meander through, so it should include access across. Number 2 was to consider more mobile, i.e. floating parking that could be on a barge, that could move from event to event or something. You know, it's vision. We can think of anything. We don't have to think about how, right? So potentially moving parking, if you will, also more floating homes and potentially floating businesses. So some of the small businesses that are currently in Marinship that might be underwater in 50 years, why not make a plan that's a phase plan to move them onto the water and still maintain the character and excitement of the area. And then the third is to accept the reality and allow for and plan for some marshland water, water area that's not water today, but incorporate that into the beauty of the area. So that's our 3 things.
You can leave it there. Yeah, just softly. Great. And not gonna have that.
So group 3 looked at really looking at sea rise and the Marinship as an opportunity going forward. So opportunity for change. And the question we came up, of course, was just, can we keep the current usage makeup without major infrastructure upgrade or changes to the Marinship? And things we wanted to look at going forward was upgrades to the infrastructure, whether it be seawalls, utilities, circulation flow. It's for bikes, pedestrian, cars. Looking at possible water taxis down the Marinship that can bring people from Marinship to downtown and vice versa throughout Sausalito, and really keeping it off of Bridgeway itself. The third item, business and land use. So possibly changing, of course, the makeup of the Marinship. There's definitely a lot of business down there that may not be permitted to be down there now, but looking at what ways we can continue using land use or changing that going forward. Mixed-use buildings. Was mentioned, of course, on Group 1 as well, but looking at possibly office space at the bottom and potential affordable housing above that, whether it be senior housing or workforce housing within that different business uses down there. So definitely going to be more density is end up what we're looking at going forward. Number 5, public access for waterfront activities, additional waterfront access going forward. Number 6, acknowledge historical elements of the Marinship. There's definitely a lot of historical features the Marinship has provided, but of course keeping a lot of those, but also of course moving to the future, the next 20, 30, 40 years, of course utilizing the current use of the buildings, but possibly changing some too. Number 7, marine industry diversity, i.e. shipyards support industries as well. A lot of the industries down there, you need, of course, a rope maker, you need a sail maker, you need definitely industries to support. If you have somebody building a boat, you need all the other industries to support each other. Otherwise, one's going to die, they're all going to die together. But making sure we have that infrastructure and ability to have the supporting businesses down there with them as well. So that's table number 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Do we have the spokesperson from table 2 ready to go? No. Ken, missing in action. Okay, table 4, please. Do we have someone from table 4 who's prepared to report out? Looks like we have Christina from table 4.
Well, we have a list of about 17 items, and many of them have already been discussed. But one of the things we're interested in was what are the costs and economics of mitigating the sea level rise? So that's something that is not a vision necessarily, but something we'd like to learn more about. We're interested in walking paths through the Marinship, and separate paths are really needed for the bikes versus the pedestrians. And we'd like to keep the bikes off the bridgeway for safety. Very pro-business, and we love the idea of the live-work as an excellent solution in the Marinship. And we talked about housing solutions such as co-ops, and Galilee was mentioned as a great example of how that works very well. We love the vibe near the Le Garage, but not too much industrial. We'd love to see an incorporation of farmers markets and activation of the area with a lot of foot traffic and so on, like Larkspur Landing. We like the idea of Cannery Row as a good example of how you use... Hold on. I have a caveat. Hold on. The idea of Cannery Row and how you use adaptive reuse for historic buildings. And not necessarily the junky t-shirt shops, but how you actually bring those buildings back to life that are no longer in their useful life in their current condition. We also like the idea of the San Francisco Ferry Building because of the refurbishment of that is a good example of how you can incorporate more local retail and farm-to-table kind of ideas for retail. We're not in favor of homeless shelters in the area, but we like the idea of maybe incorporating historic museum and library that can really celebrate some of the history of the area. I know the Historic Society is working hard to recapture a lot of artifacts and so on, and they need a home eventually, so that would be an interesting consideration. We wanted to see some signage, including the history of the area, on some of these paths, so you can, walk around and learn a little bit about the history of the area or point out major attractions along those walks. And engage the waterfront for public access, not necessarily a lot of sea-doos and things like that, but actually people that can enjoy the waterfront. We definitely want to continue the development of the maritime issues. I guess we quote, we want makers to make and builders to build, and so on. And fixers to fix, yes, thank you. And an example was used as the Art Design Exchange, the ADX in Portland, Oregon, where a lot of these artists really have a much more focused area, not dissimilar to what the maritime or the area is now, or the Marinship, but we want to support public transportation and smaller shuttle vans and stay away from big tourist buses. So, yeah.
Good.
Table 5, we have Lisa.
Okay, table 5 had a lot of great ideas, many of which you've already heard. We spent a lot of time talking about sea level rise, and we're not convinced that we can keep the water back. We talked about kind of a planned retreat / adaptation, the floating offices / homes, etc., raising the buildings. We didn't think it was likely we'd ever get consensus for a bond measure to put significant investment in infrastructure. We definitely, we talked about a natural seawall a bit there, which we thought would be good. We talked about preserving the maritime and arts character of the Marinship. We were not into adding any market rate housing or malls or restaurants, but we were open to limited residential areas in terms of small scale, live work, floating residences, affordable housing, senior or otherwise. We're not so much into offices, but we did like the working maritime type things. We had an idea that we should, the city should foster a Marinship merchants organization. You know, get all the Marinship people talking together, foster communications amongst them and the various city level planning efforts, etc. We're concerned about transportation in the Marinship. The buses need to work better, so public transportation. We also like the idea of a bike-specific path, walking-specific path, maybe sharing, but different lanes, or maybe separate. This would also spread out visitors. Bring visitors to the waterfront, to the historic areas, to the artists and restaurants that do exist. We also felt fairly strongly about keeping a Marinship focused plan. We didn't want to see the Marinship just diluted into the focus of, you know, we think it's a unique and complex area. We think it needs separate studies, separate solutions. But we also thought that in the end, whatever the city regulates, it has to be prepared to enforce. And I think that's it. That was us.
Thank you. Thank you. That brings us to table 5.
That was 5.
6. Ian from table 6.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ian Sobieski, and representing table 6. We had a couple quickie ideas, like an interest in promoting knowledge of Marinship even in the community, say with a Marinship Day, was one idea that we had. Preserving the local character of the waterfront for small businesses, artists, tinkerers, light industry, and boating. And there was also an issue raised, and it dovetails with the previous table's notion of enforcing standards, when there was some noting that places that are zoned industrial and have industrial use currently are being in conflict with other activities that are maybe classified as industrial, but not really. So they complain about, these new activities are complaining about the noise of genuine industrial. And that having a real delineation between industrial meaning industrial and non-industrial meaning non-industrial, it matters. But the real, but at a different level, probably a different perspective that we wanted to proffer to everyone, is that this approach isn't going to get us where we want to go. The thought is that this is a highly technical and constrained problem. You have many landowners, you have a lot of technical issues, and a lot of community interest that radically influences this entire process. We all, many of us, I'm sure, like Caveo Point, but if we were going to listen to someone propose to develop a hotel at Caveo Point, not having had it there, we would have been really concerned. And a 65-room hotel that looks like Caveo Point versus a 65-room hotel that looks like a block building has radically different public support. And so too, a lot of the discussion, we heard it with the booze about Larkspur Landing, get bogged down by concerns and lack of trust about what actually will fill in these labels of industrial or housing or hotel or businesses. It's a technical problem and it requires a sharp pencil approach. And so the proposal for everyone to consider is actually having a sharp pencil approach. That is having a team of people, including architects, infrastructure designers, artists, and others, to be creative in coming up with an actual master plan, a site plan for the entire Marinship that includes trade-offs between all the constituent issues to see whether we can have it all. Maybe it's possible. Maybe it isn't, but if it isn't, a clear trade-off between this and that, able to be defended by someone standing in front of a room like this, defending their plan. Why did you put the park there? You put a hotel in the left corner. I hate that. But the guy or the person speaking could say the hotel makes everything else possible. It makes the waterfront possible. It makes this possible. It makes this artist commune possible. That kind of conversation can only happen with a sharp pencil. And we have the resources here to do it. We've got architects in the community. We have artists in the community. You can have a design competition of 3 or 4 teams headed by an architect with other headed by an architect, sorry about that, with others, infrastructure people, business people, developers. I'm a business person, so I could add that perspective to these different teams to come up with radically different approaches to try to meet all the things we care about. The end result of that might be that one of those plans hits the nail on the head. But it's more likely that freedom to come up with the whole integrated plan will allow radically different visions of what's possible. Specific visions. Visions don't have to be vague. Specific visions that are actually inspirational to us. And maybe a meta plan comes out of all that. But working at this level down, our thought is maybe backwards. So that's table 6.
Thank you, Ian. Table 7.
Hey guys, I'm going to be brief. I'm representing table number 7 over there. The one thing that we did want to share is, like, though I'm kind of sharing a recap of our conversation, we didn't necessarily feel like a deep sense of consensus over a lot of really hard questions. And so I'm just going to share kind of an overview of what we did agree on, and then some of the... What'd you say? You want me to move this way? Okay. Okay, so, and in general, there was some just sort of conversation about concerns about sort of politics in this process and whose voices are being heard louder than others. And overall, just a really good point made about prioritizing certain voices in this process, because maybe developers or those with business interests, their voices are naturally going to be heard louder. So how can we create spaces for more vulnerable voices to be heard? We did also just have a question for the group. Like, how many people here live in the Marinship that are here today? Yeah, live in the house. Yeah, the house one. And how many people work or have industry in the Marinship? Okay, cool. So we were just curious. Okay, so complexity. Okay, so there are things that we were all aligned on that we don't want. We don't want it to become a parking lot or filled with condos and generic office space. I think we were all very, very much on the same page there. What we do want is to support the team that whoever just spoke said. We resoundingly agree with that idea of more of a precision focus. And a team and plans with specificity that we can actually sort of technically wrap our arms around. But in order, just kind of at the big vision perspective, we do honor and want to honor diversity. So that, diversity of artisans, of a preserved working class, of industry. So we want to and envision a diverse community. We honor preservation and the environment, and that's extremely important to our group, as well as creativity, artistry, and innovation. We don't want to be stuck in the past. There's a sense of there are some real characteristics that we can build upon, and so we should be looking at investing in innovation on some of the infrastructure that we already have. I did like the quote of keep Sausalito salty, and I think that the definition of what we just said is maybe a more clarifying term for what that is. We do want to overall just make sure everyone understands that we do promote workmanship. That to us means designated and prioritized space for light industrial, messy work. And being mindful about where that happens, how that happens, but prioritizing that space and the character of it. And then overall, just making sure that we understand that as decisions get made, that our ROI is just not the business case in and of itself. I think that sort of is the character, as we make decisions moving forward about space and land use, it's not the ROI that should be our North Star.
Thanks, Kat. That was table 7. We'd like to hear from table 8 now. We have Carolyn coming up.
Table 8 included several people who have been here a long time, people who have lived, and at our table there were several people who have lived here a long time, shared with us the history, complicated history of the Marinship, and had strong views about it. We did, as a table, definitely endorse the character, the maritime use character of the Marinship, all the historic uses related to shipbuilding and so forth, as well as artistic uses. We like the idea of shore access. We feel that's very important. We also talked about a path that would go through the Marinship, and some question about whether we do or do not want bicycles. Always the issue of bicycles flooding into Sausalito. So we were a little not sure how we felt about bicycles, but we did like the idea of a path in the appropriate place. We had some nice examples of uses in other waterfront communities, such as Port Townsend, where there's apparently a hospitality center for maritime uses. We like that as an example, and perhaps also a mooring field, which would be a source of revenue to help do some of the infrastructure improvements. We did talk about the issue of sea level rise as a prevailing background issue that is critical, and everything must be cognizant of that threat. And we talked about having some affordable housing and live-work spaces also as a use that we might like to see in the area. So those are some of our thoughts.
Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate that. It brings us to table 9. We have a spokesperson right here, Jasper from table 9.
Thank you, guys. So since we're table 9, obviously a lot of this has already been covered of what we kind of came up with. We were resoundingly, desiring to keep the industrial kind of waterfront side of Sausalito very important. We had some discussions of reclaiming some kind of natural features of the Sausalito waterfront, which have been, built over the years. There's a river that runs down kind of through Gate 3 Road, which is now a giant culvert. We also agreed that there's better access to allow the public to enjoy it. The public then kind of will invest in it and have more appreciation for its value here in town. We had a little bit of discussion on the zoning. We kind of felt the overarching picture is really the sea level rise and the economics of property owners investing in the infrastructure required to offset this. Seems like the industrial income for a landowner isn't as profitable as it could be if it was condos or other use. And we kind of tied that in with the idea of, a large proportion of this isn't actually being used for noisy industrial industry. A lot of it's office buildings, things like that. And there might be some sort of solution of keeping more of the kind of waterfront, heavier use, heavier noise zone, more industrial, and maybe the zone up towards Bridgeway that is a lot more office space maybe becomes a little more, localized community of income housing for the 3,000 jobs that are there, and allow that to become a smaller community, lower impacts. A lot of the people I know are driving pretty horrifying distances to come here to work every day. We all care about our carbon footprint here. So in the time to that, one of the interesting things is how are we going to afford to deal with the sea level rise? The main issue is, there's not going to be funding to build a giant seawall through the bay here. That's not going to happen. No one's going to build a giant sea gate, probably a Golden Gate. So what we saw was, if you are allowed to change the zoning, build a higher income property, that would allow a landowner to want to make their personal investment of building their own localized walls and pumps, of which I know some shops already have here. So I actually kind of spun off this myself a little bit, so if anyone at my table disagrees, please chime in. But I personally thought it would be kind of cool if there was more of a public support, the aesthetics, the sentimental realities of the Marinship, people like it. But how do we maintain it? How do we allow the property owners to keep that going? So if there's some sort of government grant structure that will allow, a marine industrial owner to get the funds in order to build their localized, water prevention systems and allow them to keep it industrial, I thought that might be a positive thing. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasper. That was table 9. Thank you, table 9. Good work. And now we have Ginger from table 10.
I think two of us were going to talk. We went over a lot of things at our table. I'm Ginger Cassidy. I live down the houseboats down the way. And at our table, we just want to acknowledge the fact that we already have a really thriving multi-use community down there on the waterfront. And we want to be able to sustain that as a place for artists and makers and boat builders and nonprofits that can be able to thrive. But we also acknowledge the fact that addressing climate change and climate mitigation is one of the biggest things that all of us are going to have to be dealing with. We already are dealing with it. A few years ago, we built up the seawalls of the houseboat community, and we were able to do it. So I think that we have to be really cautious about some of the false solutions that developers put forward as a way to address, like, oh, we can bring in extra tax revenue, extra resources to help build up these seawalls or whatever we come up with. But I think we have an opportunity here as a community and just being within California where we've been able to look at a lot of different sustainable ways to address these things. I think we have an opportunity to be a leader as Sausalito to think about what are some cool options that we can look at and what are different ways we can bring in creative ideas like the things that are being discussed here in order to move forward a way to address the global sea level rise. And so I think for us, a lot of things that you just spoke to on restoring areas but also not expanding development, keeping a lot of the places intact that are already there, providing affordable housing for not only the workers there, the boat builders, but also space for nonprofits, be able to continue the critical work that a lot of groups are doing across the Bay Area. So I think we have a lot of opportunity here, and I think it's a really fruitful discussion that we're all having, but I think we just really need to be careful when we talk about more development. I think that a lot of us at our table align that we don't want more, we want less development, but we want really innovative solutions that's going to be able to really support and sustain the community that's already in the maritime waterfront. And so I'm going to hand it over to Maria, who's the owner of the Free to Be, and third generation here in Sausalito and has a long history to speak to the importance of being a boat builder and a maker here on the waterfront.
Thanks, Ginger. And thank you, everybody, for coming out today and all the interest in this room. I have a question. How many of you go sailing on San Francisco Bay? How many of you guys get on boats here in Sausalito? Okay, great. That's a lot of you. I love it too. Schooner Free to Be is my boat. It's moored here in the Sausalito Yacht Harbor. We haul out in the Marinship. We are inspected by the Coast Guard. A lot of important boats on this body of water are hauled out here in the Marinship. Large boats, ferry boats, fire boats. So with 60% of sales tax being generated from the Marinship and 3,000 jobs being held by folks in the Marinship, our table felt that sustaining and supporting the growth of the working waterfront with long-term leases for improvements was imperative. Because those folks working in the Marinship are supporting all these boats that we're enjoying when we go out recreationally. Without any other thought on the matter, some sort of enforcement or Port Authority of Sausalito in place to actually enforce whatever plan we come up with, we felt was imperative. Because no matter what work we do here today, without appropriate funding for enforcement, this all doesn't matter. So proper Port Authority of Sausalito would be important. A seaport similar to Mystic or Port Townsend that celebrates the historical element and where land meets sea would be nice to see down there. However, we do have a working waterfront, which is an active community that's doing all those things that are not a museum. And as long as we protect them, we can see that in actual real time. Additional public access safely through the Marinship would be nice. Maintaining roads and keeping it safe to go through there, whether it's on a bike or on foot or car. Building a seawall to combat, sea rise is important, and figuring out how to make that happen and fund that through the city. Hopefully the city would fund that as opposed to making it go private and then having sort of people's teeth in it. So that was sort of a concern of ours. We also really thought that with sea rise, being leaders of industry in climate change, finding a way to
have the Marinship be an educational place about sea rise would be great. And I don't know how we can do that, but that's something that was on everyone's mind on our table. So I'm going to wrap it up because that's that. So good luck to all of us in preserving the Marinship.
Thank you, guys. That was table 10, which brings us to table 11. We have Carlo.
Hello, everybody. We had a lot of great opinions at our table, and we didn't always agree on anything, but we came to some consensuses. So I'll start with the stuff we weren't able to come to consensus on, and then go to items we were. So we were really split on a multi-use pathway with complete circulation throughout the Marinship. There were some concerns over bikes and scooters and other forms of transportation. At the same time, we all recognize that there is going to be a change in transportation in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years in terms of what's existing with cars, autonomous vehicles, scooters, and other things that will make up our transportation infrastructure. ULI says in 10 years, all cars are going to be autonomous. Now, whether you believe that or not is a different story, but that really impacts how you look at FAR and other things and parking requirements in the Marinship and other places. And if we're doing this for the next 30 years, we really need to have that long-term vision. We all agreed on that. We really want to keep all the current uses and look at all the infrastructure upgrades needed to address coming climate change. Circulation is really important in the Marinship, with a lot of roads being private. The historic character, and really making sure you're not displacing any arts or industrial tenants, whether that's boats or otherwise. At the same time, looking at the concerns about circulation in terms of if the city can potentially partner with property owners to create plans that are accredited to the entirety of the Marinship and Sausalito as a whole. And looking at studying the possibility for retrofits of existing buildings that are potentially not uses that the community is supportive of. Things like office and that the community may not necessarily want down there, looking at retrofitting those opportunities to be uses that are more accredited to the community, while being cognizant of the existing toxicity because it was a boatyard. And so doing live work and some of these other things, being cognizant of those items. We talked about the possibility of specifically senior housing in those as well. As City of Sausalito has from 2000 to 2010 a 72% increase in people over 60, with more coming. And we are not providing any services for our seniors. And so it seems like an opportunity, if you have existing projects, to look at that possibility and to look at a study on that specifically. We were advocating the adoption of the Mills Act and the exploration of possible discontinuous historic landmark district, with the understanding that if you were able to do that, you would be able to increase the tax base and raise historic tax credits. And that was the understanding at the time at the table. So that's it for me. Let me know if I've mischaracterized anything. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Carlo. That was table 11. We're getting down to the last few tables. We have 12 tables plus 2 more in the back. We won't forget anybody. But I want everyone in the room to start thinking about, after all the report outs, you're going to have 5 blue sticker dots. Let's think of it as 5 votes. And the very last thing we're going to ask you to do is to vote on the wall on all the ideas you've heard from the report outs.
Wow.
So you can spread out your dots on 5 different topics. If you love an idea so much you want to spend all 5 dots on that one idea, you can just go for it. And with that, we're going to ask for table 12. Thank you. What's your name? Nora. We have Nora from table 12.
Hi there. So I'm representing table 12. Like a lot of the tables, we had a lot of opinions. I just want to start off with saying who we sort of represented at our table. We have artists and residents of the Marinship, as well as a resident of the Anchorage. We have people who work in the Marinship, doing things that include arts, traditional maritime crafts, landscape architecture, and then we have people who live and work in Sausalito in fields like sustainability and who have lived here for a very long time, and so have a lot of concerns about the city itself. So I'm trying to sum up all the things we talked about, and I apologize to my table if I leave anything out. I'm not going to get into some of the really specific stuff that we talked about, but try to get sort of broader strokes. One of the things we talked about was how the sort of people in the Marinship, and more specifically, I think, Sausalitans in the Marinship. So one thing we want to foster is smaller communities, maybe having live workspaces that would be for people working in the Marinship and would include things like small shops and restaurants that would be supporting those workers and or giving them a place to sell their crafts. There was also talk about having community spaces where there could be educational programs, there could be libraries, there could be museums that would sort of help foster the sort of maritime tradition and the artistic tradition in Sausalito. There's also talk of senior housing and perhaps memory care. There are 2 sites that I guess are being discussed as sort of housing that sort of housing. And so there was hope that we could provide senior housing that would be convenient to Molly Stone's and to the post office and would be in a central location like we have in the Marinship. One of the other big things we talked about was the environment. One hope was that we would be able to be a leader and that our buildings themselves, any sort of development or redevelopment of existing structures would foster and demonstrate innovation and long-term thinking about the environment and sort of would have sea level rise and climate change disaster preparedness. So not only would we be sort of mitigating our impact on the environment, but we'd be ready for the inevitable storms and disasters that are going to come with climate change. We also were concerned about marsh restoration and preservation and the marshes as a way of mitigating the impact of sea level rise. There was also a call for safe, environmentally responsible access to shore from the waterfront. So, acknowledging that there are people living on our anchorage and sort of accommodating their ability to get to shore and, live responsibly on the anchorage. And then just in general, balancing access to and protection of our shoreline. So, providing, perhaps providing more of a pathway through the Marinship, but sort of providing a balance so people aren't, necessarily going too close to marshes or negatively impacting, bird habitats or other marsh restoration activities. And one thing that I think came up again and again in our discussions is there is no one-size-fits-all. Even within the Marinship itself, there are several sort of small areas within the Marinship that are very different and have very different histories and different needs. So, there's just a need to be very conscious going forward that we're not talking about just one mass of the Marinship. There are several different types of people who live there, several different types of people who work there, and sort of, keeping that in mind. I think that's everything, so thank you.
Thank you, Nora. I would like to ask table 13 in the back corner to come up, and then for the person, table 14 on the right-hand side to come up and be ready to go right after 13. And then I want to make sure we have the notes from table 2 transferred into a poster. And what's your name?
Shaw.
Shaw.
Table 13.
Here's Shaw, table 13.
Thank you. We had a very diverse table in that people who have lived here a long time, people who have just also moved here, and many different perspectives, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about that. One of the things we talked about really is creating a galvanizing vision for this project in the Marinship. This galvanizing vision could take the form of taking a leadership role in looking at climate change, looking at sea level rise, and how to create, in some sense, a showcase of how to deal with it in the future. One of the things that, of course, it's it's dynamic and it's over the next 30 to 50 years. So whatever we plan, I think, has to be resilient to that time frame. So some of the resiliency things we talked about is mitigating sea level rise. It's dynamic. So we talked a lot about marshes or soft systems. instead of seawalls. We talked also about a little bit about the possibility of creating a more resilient environment in terms of community gardens and farming or vertical farming and food. We also looked at everything according to the concept of, the sea level rise, historical context, implementation, and trying to maintain character. We note that 85% of the land is private, and some of our levers are zoning regulations and actually infrastructure. The city puts in the infrastructure. Now, when we think about infrastructure, of course, we think about electricity, sewer, water. With sea level rise, a lot of this could fail. So we have to think about how to strengthen and build resiliency there. And these could be levers to promote businesses to act in different ways. Now, another thing that we talked about is the hidden cost of developing Marinship Park. And it's just like Dunphy Park in some sense. There are many ancestral areas, there are toxic areas within the Marinship area. And when we plan for whatever we choose to do, we have to build in the unknown. And the unknown might be everything from suddenly discovering a toxic area or discovering an ancestral mound. And we have to plan for this, otherwise a lot of these projects could be abandoned. Thank you. So the other thing we really focused on and some of the ideas in maintaining the Marinship character and trying to build for the future is, one is circulation. I think we talked about integrated maybe bike path, walking path, jogging path, but also building in some sense tourism or shops along the way to somehow take control of tourism as opposed to being it imposed on the community of Sausalito, but maybe to change the nature of tourism in the area. In some sense, the tourism, for example, is characterized by heath in its ceramic building, an historical ceramic building. We should focus on everything from our boat building, our maker characteristics, and begin to showcase that even houseboat living. So there are ways to build tourism and to take tourism into our own hands, and also points where tourists come in and off, of course. I think there are a couple of other things we talked about, maintaining the industrial use of the area, boat building, maritime center, maintaining the arts and whatnot, and arts and crafts in the area, and actually making it flourish and part of the tourism fabric. And then access to public docking and tie-ups, I think is something that was also addressed in our table. In a sense, half of Sausalito's diverse community, or maybe not half, but a good number, live on the water. And we could open up maritime tourism, water tourism, and also access for residents who live on the water or near the water to be able to navigate the waterways. I think that's something we talked about. I think we're really thinking about planning over a longer term and not having something that has to be revisited again and again. Change is coming, and we have an opportunity to create a great vision for Sausalito to show how we can manage the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Brings us to table 14. And then after this speaker, we'll have the public forum, open mic. As long as you've turned in a card. I have about 12 cards so far, so I'm going to make one more call for cards, and then we're going to close it off. Table 14, Richard.
Thank you. Well, I'm last, and I'll make it brief. Our table went on and on and on, and with a lot of detail, and really don't have solutions to offer, as many of the tables did. However, we did come to consensus. Certainly, we want to preserve and maintain and encourage the maritime heritage, the arts, the crafts, the creative people in the Marinship, even to the tech folks and the robot makers. We have a pretty rich environment here of creative people, and we feel that's very important to hold on to. Also connected to that is the the maritime history and tradition of our area. So we want to maintain that and inform people about it, maybe with more educational opportunities. We are concerned about the affordability of a workspace for artists and maritime people. We don't have a solution to that. However, hopefully there is a solution out there somewhere, because that's one of the key issues that face a lot of folks in the Marinship. A lot of people are just being priced out of their livelihoods, which is really a shame. We briefly discussed access. We recognize that shore access is really an issue in Sausalito for many people, and I won't go into more detail there except that we support the concept of good access. As far as pathways through the Marinship, we kind of did not favor developing a major kind of pathway, although we do support keeping the pathways safe. Also, we, as a group, were not real supportive of trying to develop any kind of housing, even though some kind of affordable housing for maritime workers and artists and the like would be kind of a nice goal. We're really concerned about how that could lead to gentrification, as we've seen happen in many, many other communities. So that's pretty much the summary. Sea level, we didn't really address that much, except to say that somebody will solve that problem.
Thank you. That was somebody from table 14, named Richard.
First, I'd like to ask how many of us here own one of the parcels in Marinship? So very few. It looks like 1 or 2%. So I just wanted to comment that the economic analysis that we saw in the beginning was exclusively limited to the value that would be gained of development to property owners. So I would encourage this process to consider also the economic value for those who otherwise participate in this community. I think that's important as well. Those who work here, and the city represents all of us, not just those who own property in the Marinship. Second, I'd like us to consider thinking beyond what we want to see and thinking about why. Why do we want to have light industry in this area? Why would we want to have a hotel or more housing? Why would we want to have offices? And I hope that can drive our discussion so that we can think about our priorities in a broad and visionary way. And then third, I'd like to encourage the committee and the city council to think about transparency in this process. I'm really appreciative that we had this meeting, but honestly, I'm not so interested in how many meetings we have in this process. I'd like to know how you've incorporated what you've heard. And I'd really like to hear a little bit more about, of the huge range of voices, how you decided to prioritize some voices more than others. And I think everybody here has taken a huge amount of time. If you consider the value of everyone's time and what you could have been doing today instead, everybody's invested a whole lot in this process, which is so great. I hope you keep coming, and I hope the committee and the council can let us know what they're doing with what they heard from all of your valuable voices.
I think my only comment about all of this is climate catastrophe. We're in the middle of, the denial about it is unfrigging believable. If we think the Marinship is going to be above ground, I don't care what we do down there. The figures over here under sea level rise and subsidence in the Marinship, if you look at the bottom, those numbers are no longer reflective of reality. I mean, the scientists have come out with new numbers that show 2050, we're talking about 2030. The level of sea rise and the level of temperature rise is astronomically more than it was there, exponentially more. So if we're basing what we're talking about here on those figures, we're living in a non-reality. We're making this up. That's my only comment here. It's time to look at what's really happening in the world and address it that way, because this is insanity if we don't. It's a waste of, well, anyway, that's it. That's all I have to say.
I'm going to beat a dead horse. I'm going to say the same thing. I think that the Bay Wave data is, I was told it was middle ground by multiple members of GPAC. However, I think it's low. It's overly optimistic. The UN and the National Academy of Sciences in 2018 said 1 foot in 12 years. So that's now 10 years. And 2 feet in 32 years. That's 2051. There was just an article and multiple research projects done on subsidence. They're predicting that subsidence is going to double it. So by 2050, we're not going to have 2 feet of sea level rise in the Marinship. We're going to have 4 feet. 2 of rise and 2 feet down of subsidence. I think that any plans that should be done in this need to be based on the worst case scenario, not on the middle or optimistic scenario. The 10 hottest years in the history of recorded weather have been since 1998, and the Arctic is burning. Greenland is melting faster than they could conceive of. And you've got state-sized icebergs caving off the Antarctic. So it's all very nice to have all this lovely vision, but I think you need to be realistic and plan based on the worst-case scenario. That's 4 feet. We're going to lose a lot of this. And I don't think there's money for a seawall unless you get some kind of wonderful grant. So, just to say.
Hi, my name's Julie, not Vita, but I live on the houseboats despite the New York Yankees hat. And echoing what the 2 former women have said, but a little bit with sort of just another little spin on it, is that I would love to see us stop talking about building a seawall and using the language of combating and mitigating, and climate change is here. How can we start talking about living with? How can we start talking about allowing the water to come in, because it's coming in. So with that frame, how can Sausalito be a leader in finding solutions of working with nature? The nation's looking at solutions, the world is looking at solutions. We are so optimally positioned with our land meets water, meets history, meets urban, meets rural, meets technology. We are so optimally positioned to be leaders, and the money will follow that. So if we're worried about developers making money, it's not by building the same business as usual kind of things. That is not a solution. So if developers really want to make money, and if Sausalito really wants more tax dollars, we need to help use what we really have as our features. So, thank you.
Suddenly I really don't know what to say because everyone else has been so eloquent. But I think we're all like Platonists. As Plato pointed out, to not participate in government is to leave government to the inferiors, or at best to people who disagree with you. So here we are. And so I think it's important that we recognize that the original reason for the Marinship specific plan and the old general plan was what used to be referred to as the monopolization of Sausalito. And that is the Sausalito being colonized by what I pompously refer to as the international real estate plutocracy. And we got together and we stopped it. This is also an historical thing that Sausalito does, starting with William Randolph Hearst, when he wanted to build his Hearst Castle here, and we drove him out of town, and he had to go all the way to Big Sur in order to fulfill that. And so what I want to say is that Sausalito is for Sausalitans, not for Wall Street, not for the Bourse in Paris or Beijing or Tokyo. And this is part of what we've been doing in the past, and that's what this is now, because part of the reason for undoing the specific protections of the Marinship for some people was to go back and to be able to colonize it for the what used to be called the highest level of use, which was defined under those terms as money appearing on a ticker tape on Wall Street or London, as opposed to the highest and best use is always for the citizens of the state. And so Sausalito here needs to remember that this environment is a very valuable environment, but it's for us, and it is for the things that are supposed to happen here. And that includes all of the waterfront things that you see going on, and I would like to see them be protected.
I want to thank Tom for those last comments and giving us some important historical perspective. Maybe like many of you, this is not something the average citizen comes to, and I think many of you are like me. We tend to go to these things because we're interested. But because this isn't the first rodeo for most of us, and we've been to other community planning events like this, I think it's appropriate for us to be wary and to pick up on some of the signals we've already seen here in the presentations from the city officials. And I think it's very clear what's going on, that the existing landowners in Marinship want to upzone their property. That's not a moral failure on their part. That's what people do that own property that want to make money off it. And it just happens. It's a fact of life. The problem, I think, is that city officials are then caught in a vortex in a way, and they become seduced. And the seduction basically works like this. The claim is, oh, we don't have any money, we don't have any resources. We're living, of course, in the richest county and one of the richest cities in the richest county in the country, and city officials have already become myopic and said, well, we have no money for our city. That's another discussion, but it's important because that drive to generate revenue and to see sales tax and property tax revenue from upzoning drives most city officials with limited vision to embrace that solution to their perceived problem. And it becomes a vicious circle. And it means, too, that there's a fusion between people who want to upzone their property and city officials who think that this is an easy way to generate revenue and solve problems. And I would just warn everyone to be very, very careful of this dynamic in the coming year. There's a train, it's moving. City officials are very clear about what they intend to do. They're obligated to hold meetings like this, but don't be fooled. They have an agenda. They're very clear about what they want to do. And we're going to have to be very critical and very wary to make sure that their agenda, as it's been expressed to me, people tell me it's so dirty down there. You know, think of the tax revenue that could be generated. I'm almost done. These are real political dynamics that are underlying this process, and we just have to be aware of them and be prepared to fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. The next speaker, I'm going to, in the interest of time and mutual respect for everybody, I'm going to ask everyone to hold your applause. Jeff Jacobs?
No applause? No. Laughs, jeering, fists in the air. Hello, Shabbat Shalom, happy Saturday. And I am overjoyed to see so many American citizens, USAers, here to talk about something that I'm hoping for all of us does not just revolve around the wallet. These are people who care. Greta Thunberg has arrived here now on a sailboat to bring a message that we can do something now. We watched what happened at Dunphy Park, which is, I'm not bringing bad news to people, I'm just asking them to open their eyes as they walk down Bridgeway Avenue and see what happens instead of following the beautiful Shabbos rules of doing nothing, which would have been the best outcome there for that space of land. Paradise was paved and made into a parking lot. That can mitigate against sea level rise. It's true, they raised it 3 feet, and it was quite an engineering job to do. What's going to happen with marine ships? In 8 months, the USA was able to entirely industrialize a waterfront and produce a ship a month. What are we going to do about our past mistakes and not making them in the present? I'm asking the question. And one answer is public access. That we start not from the top down, but from the bottom up. And the people out here that live, the mariners that live offshore, salty traditionalists as some of us are, mistake-prone individuals as all of us are at times, by law are given public access 440 linear square feet, or 2% of the dock space, whichever is larger, in all Marinship's properties. We know that law is not being observed now. I'm gonna wrap this up, right? Thank you. I'm gonna wrap this up. Courtroom, please let me do this. Thank you. The alternative to public access is privatization of even below high tide. What we're doing is fighting back. 333, you can go there and get an Anchor Out Chronicles t-shirt, Caledonia Street. Or this Thursday, Courtroom C at 9 a.m., we have sued Schoonmakers Marina, who are not giving public access. We are urging everybody to come by at 9 a.m., Courtroom C on Thursday. On Thursday, okay? Every place here must offer public access. Okay, hold the applause.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. After,
do it.
After Nancy, we have Sandra. Just Sandra.
I'll see y'all there.
Thanks, Jeff. Alice Merrill, and then Sunny Yao. After Nancy.
One of the other things is I was thinking of the Artists Association has been actively, we have 157 artists in our building. We've been trying to market it for open studios, and so many times we get people that come in and say, I didn't know this existed. Right. It is just so amazing that people in Sausalito doesn't even know it exists. And they're trying to make people aware of it and support it. And if you come in, you can support artists. It will help their sales tax and their work. And I think it's important that people be aware of all the things that are going on in the Marinship. And once they are, they can support it and attend it and be amazed by it. So that was my only question.
Thank you, Nancy. And we have Sandra.
There's two of us. Hi, I'm Sandra, and I didn't hear a lot of conversation about innovation. We've had so much innovation come out of the Marinship area. So much really important stuff has happened. Alan Watts and the Zen and the Beatniks, Jack London, The Well. I mean, your internet chat from today, it came out of that area. Unspoken firsts in tech, like the .com, the first deviation from the .com.to came out off the Varda. And the first pets were cloned down in the Liberty Shipway. But so much tech has happened down there, unspoken tech, all kinds of firsts. And I think that incentivizing innovators to keep renting those offices is really important. The Long Now is down there, and I can't remember his name, but the fellow that did the whole Earth catalog. That's the guy. And anyway, so much really cool stuff is under the surface down there that we don't want to lose. That's all I've got.
I know that the people who go to who study at the Arquez Boat Building Center, which is a cool place, they learn all about boat building. I don't know any of them. Well, I do. I know some who have stayed. Not very many. Not very many have stayed. Arquez Boat Building. Most of them go east or to Port Townsend. We don't have a Mystic here. We don't have, and we could have that, and there's no support for that right now, for that kind of local, wonderful lore, knowledge, and I think that the people on the Hill need to learn more about that and care about it. I don't know how to get them to, but it really makes me sad that so many people, wonderful boat builders, leave for other places, mostly the East Coast. They don't start there. That's where the jobs are. And so I would love it if we had that kind of thinking here. I know that's not really the specific plan. And thank you. No claps.
Regarding the rising sea levels, I think about that a lot because I do live out on a boat. I am an anchor out, and I think about tsunamis sometimes. And I think, wow, what if the ice melted really, really fast and we got a big wave? And would we be prepared for an emergency like that? Do we have food resources? Do we have water resources stored somewhere? Do we have a CERT program, which is Citizens for Emergency Readiness Training? So we need funding, right? That all comes down to money. Every idiot, oh, I'm sorry for using that word, everybody knows it takes money. So I thought that for some fundraising capabilities, there could be some businesses, some new businesses installed in the Marinship area. We could have a lounge where there's music and drinking and fun. That always makes tons of money. We definitely need a food industry. We need very early morning coffee and breakfast because we have fishermen and divers and workers that are going to work early. You can't get a cup of coffee before 6 a.m. anywhere in town. You also can't get anything to eat after 9 p.m. Sausalito shuts up like a drum. So maybe food trucks. I mean, that's industry that somebody could be making money, and then that would be more taxes and revenues and even maybe a percentage set aside to create a fund for the eventual catastrophe that we're dealing with that might actually end up in restoring wildlife refuges. We also need a recycling industry. Yes. We don't need recycling boxes.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, Sonny.
Thank you, Marco Esposito. Professionally, I'm a landscape architect, so I'm trying to help figure out how to shape the future, right? Like many of you are, both at the policy level, is what we're talking about today, or the design level. One of the things I haven't heard anybody talk about, say 2100 or a little bit longer time frame, because anything that is built with whatever the policy ideas that we're talking about will be around for a while, right? We're enjoying older patterns from Sausalito that were built 100 years ago, and presumably what we're doing is going to be quite lasting. One of the things that, of course, I struggle with, and I'm like any of you, I'm contributing to the world's carbon footprint. Sea level rise will affect Marinship. The current pattern of Marinship is a lot of asphalt and a lot of car-oriented things. So I think it's contributing to sea level rise. The fact that there's just a few uses and not the full range of uses, we know that that contributes to patterns of commuting and things like that. So it would be great if the specific plan could incorporate policies that will reduce the continued sea level rise, right? 2 or 3 feet may be baked in, but it'd be great to avoid 6 to 20 feet by what we all do today. So I am not of the opinion that if we just left it exactly like it is, it's really ideal, as much as there's wonderful things. I work there every day. I love it in a lot of ways, but I can imagine less asphalt. I can imagine less car-oriented place. I could imagine people living right there. It's a beautiful place to live.
I haven't lived in Sausalito for 30 years, but if I had, then I might be a little frustrated because it seems like we've been talking about the Marinship for quite some time and doing something, and the idea that we should do something about it, but there's not a lot of consensus. So I know this is all about a general plan, but I also might challenge us to think about the baby steps that we can take and the little chunks that we can just bite off and do today. Is there anything that we can just start doing?
Thank you, Lisa.
One idea is based on San Francisco's model, wherein 2% of any new development goes towards the arts. And that can be a lot of money, that little 2%. I think for a community that relies so heavily on the history of arts here, it's kind of embarrassing that the Sausalito Arts Festival, which is like a totally corporate outside endeavor, and one sculpture of a seal is what we have to show for our artistic history. I'd like to see more public art here in the plan, but I would also like to protect the working waterfront.
Okay, we'll make this quick.
Sonny and Jeff, settle down now. Can you hear me? Hey, just look out the window and you'll see the Sausalito, this side of the channel, the Sausalito waterfront, there are very few boats. Why? Well, because the city of Sausalito decided to remove boats from their waters. So Joan had asked in the meeting, does that mean that if a person comes in and they have an emergency, they can only be here for 72 hours? And the city manager said, or the police chief, Officer Rohrbacher said, yeah, that's true. And so my caution is this, is it really, I've heard nothing new, and the people that have been here, I'm a newcomer, I've been here 32 years. There's people that have been here a long, long time that grew up here. There's nothing new under the sun. We've talked about all these ideas before. Unless the city council is behind it, because those are the drivers, the city council. So in upcoming elections, make sure what the city council members, what they ran on and what they told you, and then look at the results. No permanent change is going to be made unless you get people into office, and maybe it's one of you that are able to run for office and to support the goals that we're behind. Preserve the past, the historical use of Sausalito, and we have a lot of history, but build toward the future. Yes, we need infrastructure. Yes, we need to make changes, but it's a question of balance, and you are the balance, each and every person here. It's awesome, you rock. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, Doug. We have one last speaker that got lost in the shuffle, Ms. Tricia Smith.
Hi, I'm Tricia Smith, and for those of you who know me in the room, you know everything I do generally has to do with seniors in town. Many of us in the room worked on the Age-Friendly Sausalito Task Force. Many of you also received a survey we sent out in 2013. We sent out 2,400 surveys. We got a 50% response rate, that's 1,200. The top concerns for the seniors in town were transportation, which CARS, Call a Ride for Sausalito Seniors, has taken care of. There was also rehabilitation of homes or apartments to make them for modifications. We now have an age-friendly permit process. And then the third was housing, senior housing. And that includes assisted living and memory care, of which there is none in Sausalito. We know people, I have friends who, close to 90 years old. I know a woman who drives almost every day to see her husband in Corte Madera. We have another gal who takes the bus to Novato to see her husband in a memory care. So I was very excited when there's this prospect of an office complex in the Marinship and the possibility of a conversion to residential care for seniors. Wouldn't it be wonderful for the people who live and give them their lives in Sausalito to be able to age in Sausalito? And anyway, that's it, so thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just take 2 more minutes of your time and thank all the residents for attending, and all the business owners, and all the property owners. I'd like to thank the city staff who supported this effort today. You know who you are. I'd like to thank the city council members that took time out of their weekend to attend, that are here. I'd like to thank the numerous GPAC members we had serve as table resources at this meeting, but more importantly, their dedication over the last 2.5 years and over the next 18 months to get this project done. I'd like to thank other members of boards and commissions that graciously volunteer your time on those boards and commissions and at this meeting today. I'd like to thank Supervisor Kate Sears, if she's still here, who was here earlier. I'd like to thank the Spinnaker for allowing us to use this beautiful facility, in particular Mr. Jeff Sharash, so thank you. I'd like to thank our team of the EPS fiscal consultants and all members of our team who were able to help out and support this effort today. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.